Hey,
What's up? It's the
everyone.
Pando crew.
Yeah, that's right.
Panda team.
Hey, Sam.
Awesome. Stoked.
Hi, Chris. Yeah, I guess we're just kicking it off. I mean, so I guess the space, I haven't been in the space too long, mostly just over a year now. But I've noticed it gradually shifts from largely being a technological one. I mean, like there was a heavy focus at engineering from the first place, mainly because it kind of, I guess, the Ethereum community and Web3 community arise from open source, and you mainly had a lot of it's mainly engineering focused. And I guess over the last year, we've seen a lot of products ship and a lot of large products ship mainly in a waterfall process where a lot of engineering resources have gone into a product that doesn't actually quite just have found a lot of business value, at least immediately. I personally think this is largely due to inefficiencies in product management and product marketing mainly, and a lack of focus on, I guess, if there are product managers in the space or like product management roles within teams, they're more like engineering managers as opposed to product managers who are basically product managers that find business value and learn how to achieve that in the most efficient way as quick as possible in a leaner, more typical agile fashion, right? And you typically lack even the RPM roles. You typically lack a lot of understanding of, say, UX growth, which normally, I guess, in a typical PM depending how facing. I guess if you're a technical PM, you're obviously strong with your engineering background, right? But I guess in Web 2.0, you often have a lot of PMs who are strong, I guess, who are led by UX growth, product growth. I guess we're missing a lot of that potentially, as well as just, I guess, sound product management, if not coordination in this space. And I guess I kind of just wanted to start a forum and see like what people wanted to discuss. Hey, Aiden. I really want to provide a forum to see what people wanted to actually discuss. And I guess we can all, if we're coordinating teams, I feel like we can all actually learn from each other. And I guess as opposed to, hey Chris, as opposed to like essentially Web 2, like previous startups I worked with, right? And previous like kind of PM roles, it's fairly different because you not only have, most of it, like my team isn't distributed at the moment, but I work with a lot of teams that are distributed, and I have been distributed like half the time while I was traveling, right? And I foresee that to be a common pattern amongst the teams. And not only is it distributed, you have this community, I guess, your projects are actually based around a community which heavily almost depend on it for users and validation and vastly other factors, meaning that you have an extra element, which means that you almost have to interact with it, I guess, in several ways, depending on the context and product itself. But that tends to seem to be a common pattern there, and it's open source, and it obviously comes with its own Web3 engineering processes. And so, yeah, like I guess that's kind of the situation we're dealing with. And I think, yeah, just opening it up.
Yeah, I guess I'll pick up there. First of all, I was really glad to see that you started the group. So thanks for doing that, and thanks for starting these calls too. About a year and a half ago, I started thinking along similar lines. Part of it was trying to figure out where my, I guess, background and skill set fits within the space, and I started to see the need for, I guess, project and product managers in the space. And at the time, this was probably actually almost 2 years ago. I thought it was really early. And I still think we're at early stages of the need being recognized and appreciated. But my premise has always been that in this space especially, there are a lot of really, really, really smart people building some really, really smart and complicated things. And eventually there would come a time where people would really need to start using these things. And it's at that point where people and users would have to start using these really complicated yet powerful tools that project and product managers would start to come into the picture. And I feel like, especially over the past 6 months, we're starting to enter that intersection. But I still believe it's quite an uphill battle because I don't think there's enough pain yet being felt by the really smart people building things yet to understand why they would necessarily work with a project or product manager. And I think as that pain starts to get felt more, whether it's just diminishing returns on investment, people feeling like they're spinning their wheels, or just, general frustration that nobody's using these powerful tools that we all believe in, that, people who can bridge that gap between, the really smart technical tools and the people who can and will use them, will start to be seen more and more. At least I think that's my premise and my hope, I guess.
And something that I kind of see coming from a standpoint of not being a PM myself, but working with independent projects who are they're coming together, they're distributed, they really are kind of building this open source Web3 stuff, is you find people who have great technical expertise and great ability and great vision for what they want to build. They're really good at that. But when it comes to all the implementation of, how will the end user see it? How will they interact with it? What does your site look like? What is the functionality of your app? There's a big kind of a gap where that kind of PM mind frame, that user experience interface, is super helpful and super valuable. And what I find, because we do this grant support campaign with the ETHProduct, where we help projects find support from foundations, and the foundations or the organizations who have better project management, and Aragon's one of them that I've seen, the teams tend to learn more and structure themselves a little bit better than teams that are just given a grant to kind of run off and all right, figure it out for yourselves, depending on who they are. So I find that strong leaders and strong the trust system, that people can trust that a project manager is there to help and they're there to provide resources, is a better thing. So we've been thinking about how can we get those people in early, start to develop those relationships, and see that as an essential part of building all the tools that we're building.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think related to the point that you just made, it's kind of hard to do PM sometimes when there aren't that many users, the product you're building is super technical and whatnot. So, which is super different than the Web 2 stuff where you just increase growth and whatnot. And I think thinking of it more in terms of reducing the iteration cycles is a good first step if you have a product that's very research and R&D driven. And that's one thing we do. I work on a client, and while we do have users, it's a lot of the stuff we're doing is more of a technical risk than a user adoption risk. So if we can reduce that and help the team understand that, then I find we get better outcomes. So yeah, it's a different description than working on a typical web product for sure.
Yeah, I definitely see the blockchain industry as it's like Silicon Valley. It's how Silicon Valley was back in the day. It was very dev focused. And now they need to start incorporating methodologies of lean methodologies and actually not being so dev focused, but having the pillars of product management, business side, design side, and marrying all those together so that we can create a more efficient system where these products that come about have actual value.
It's increasing iteration cycles. I think one potential guess or stab in the dark is that I feel like we're going to see potentially a lot more Web 2 / hybrid products come out, just to products actually attempt to validate, if not grow the user base before actually becoming fully fledged Web3 And the example I keep coming back to is buns.com.
Nice.
Yeah, I love them, and it's like I mean I spoke to the CEO once, but like it's a cool guy, but like
nice. That's awesome. Sasha's a great person.
That product is a Web3 product, but they essentially have abstracted all the Web3 products, Web3 aspects out from the user experience. So what it is, it's a marketplace, right, which is operated using tokens. You create listings, and anything you do is uses tokens, and you sell using tokens essentially. And essentially, the plan is essentially, it feels like a Web2 product, works just as well, except, I think they use a sidechain, I'm not sure, but essentially they will release, allow people to cryptographically manage their data and their accounts later on when it's actually important. And they've been doing amazing in terms of growth apparently. And that could potentially be one of the Web3 products that actually reach a large adoption base, to be honest. I didn't see
sorry, if I could just speak to Buns a little bit. So Buns started out as a Facebook group. So really grassroots beginnings. It started out with people like a lady, I believe didn't have pasta sauce or something like that. And so she added all of her friends into a private group and said, hey, someone has to have something that I can trade for. This is what I have. For pasta sauce, and that's what happened, and it grew rapidly. And they found that people were actually buying gift cards and Subway tokens, beer and things like that to use as trade. So it's a bartering economy that had money being taken out of it consistently, and so the token was added as a mechanism of kind of providing that liquidity. When you don't necessarily have an even trade or something like that, you could use this token to be that intermediary instead of needing to go and buy things outside. And as Peter has discussed, it comes from a traditional kind of perspective in terms of being an app that solves a problem. But as they kind of saw their issues kind of evolving, they identified that they're going to need to look at this exciting new technology. And we worked with them to make that happen, and it's a continuous kind of effort. But I'm really happy you brought that up, because I think that their approach 2 years ago would have been extremely taboo, and it would have been extremely, it wouldn't have been as accepted as it is today. And I think that we really need to be honest about how much, like even a meta transaction, something like that, 2 years ago, people would have been a bit confused about that. But we've gotten to a point now where, as other people have identified, we're ready to kind of talk about the things from the traditional world that we actually need to learn from and use to make these Web3 kind of ecosystems a reality.
Which approach would have been taboo when you say that? Like 2 years ago?
Abstracting anything away from an individual, like everyone on this call, having to be their own bank. I mean, at one point, that was what this was about, was making everyone their own bank. And, that couldn't be more confused about that as a prospective future.
Yeah. Sasha from Buns, like the CEO, did mention like he got a lot of flack in the community from doing so and approaching it this way. But like, recently this year, we've seen a huge shift in mentality as we've watched several products just ship and just not fail, but actually struggle immensely due to the poor user experience, namely Augur. But yeah, I don't want to point. I don't want to point. But that's one example that have stirred up a lot of discussion around this.
I think it's really important to just view the different things that are going on and be open and accepting of these different things, and not kind of think that anyone has the ultimate solution for this stuff, because at the end of the day, even the top researchers at the foundation are working together to solve these problems. So I mean, it's on us, on whatever layer we're focusing on, to also work together to solve these problems.
Yeah, and to come back to something I think it's Tim said about reducing iterations. I think right now too, a lot of this, the place where we can help is execution and clearing out backlog. So I feel like there are a lot of really good ideas that are still in people's heads, and in white papers, and a lot of work has been done, but I think we can really help projects in that state by helping organize all the work that's been done and channeling it into a single direction. And I usually see it as a flow that's a channeling of work in a single direction as opposed to something that continues to disperse. So when I think about reducing risk and then iterating, I think about helping projects clear out a backlog of existing things that they think these communities want to see, and then once we help them get to a point where they can get something out to the world that can be tested, whether that's another set of developers building on top of it or actual end users, then I think some of the iteration starts too. So I've been looking at it somewhat in terms of a tactical project management perspective, leading into more of a product management perspective also.
I definitely also see, just to like kind of echo what you're saying, Peter and I kind of talked about this together. I see there also being a larger kind of ecosystem coordination that's necessary, because there are so many other projects that are working on incredible things. So for example, like the Plasma Implementers call, you had on the first call people from Cosmos, people from the Ethereum Foundation, people who are implementing it for specific use cases, all on this call together and needing to coordinate some kind of effort around, around things. And so I think that the real difference from and I don't like the word management, but from a product ownership perspective, I think a real kind of difference in the Web3 world is that, we're working now with so many other products, and we're constantly evolving together. And so that wider coordination for me is what makes this not only so much fun, but also so unique from a kind of an organizational perspective.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. Like, I think you also saw this with all of the ETH2.0 stuff, where one thing where PMs and both product and project managers can help is also making these things, like these processes, legible to people who are not core devs, right? Because I think it's been like a community goal to get more people involved into this stuff. And it's just super hard to wrap your head around right now if you haven't been like spending the past 6 months full time doing this. So I think just like helping the community document things better, like explain things better, and it not only opens the space up, but it also takes that burden off the actual researchers, right? And I think it was Hudson who tweeted about that a couple months back. But like for non-technical people wanting to like enter the space, this is like one of the highest leverage things you can do, whether it's just taking notes or like making sure there's like an agenda for these things and whatnot. That coordination is like super important and doesn't tend to happen because no one party owns these calls, right? That affect the entire space.
Yeah, it's almost like with a lot of ERCs, you're almost forced. We're not forced in a bad way, but you need to slow down often to collaborate with various teams. Like from the Meta Cartel, we realized that we came up with a new design for the ERC 1077. It's going to take week by week going into various calls of various teams to then explain the design properly in a more intimate setting, and then present it out to the real world. And especially if the previous design's been out there. And that will even take 2-3 months, to be honest, to gain curry favor for a new design. And this probably means refactoring of a lot of SDKs on many fronts, especially for our team. It's like we decided to go with the design. We're going to have to go through and chuck that onto the backlog for the next month. So it's almost like when you're working around that area, you're always really wary about like going forward with things. But yeah, I guess that's a really good way of putting it, in terms of that's what makes us unique. A lot of open source collaboration does strongly come into play here for a lot of products, especially if working in infrastructure.
Also, just kind of, we were also talking a bit about Linux and Apache last time. And I'd say that another really kind of unique thing about this is that, like, as I was mentioning the Plasma Implementers call, you had people from Cosmos, people from Ethereum. I think there was another blockchain as well. And they're all open, talking together, trying to solve similar issues. And so that was a bit unique, I think, as well, is that there's almost what would be assumed to be kind of competition in a traditional sense is actually seen as allies because we're all working to solve the same problems.
Yeah, it's a lot of cooperation, which feels really hopeful as opposed to competition. And I think to your point, Aiden, too, then this coordination, and I like the word coordination a lot more than management. And I think it'll connect with people in the space a lot better than management would. But yeah, I think even the coordination is even more important now because it's hard enough to get an internal team not to duplicate work, but then when you have a lot of external teams working together towards similar outcomes, I think that the coordination to reduce the risk of duplication of work becomes even more important.
Absolutely. And it kind of erodes the traditional assumption also of how a team works together, because now all of a sudden multiple teams could actually be working on a single thing together, as we've seen multiple times now happen in different projects. So it's really exciting, and as you say, it's really hopeful for kind of what open source is assumed to be, I guess.
Yeah, there's almost like there's intra-team, as in with I guess a coordination of your team itself, but also another larger aspect to the community is just the intra-team, like inter-team kind of coordination, which is almost like if you're almost like coordinator for a group of projects, you're almost similar like a group product manager in a sense, where you're coordinating with a lot of PMs, you're coordinating with a lot of team leads, and you're trying to wrangle everyone into coordinating and effectively collaborating. I see that as a more common role going forward, even just like, it's high. And I've been just talking to a few group PMs in the real life, right? Namely Alassian, for example, in Sydney. And it's just like really interesting to hear about the distinct parallels that we're facing in this community. So potentially even like further exploration into group product management.
Yeah, and that's something I've been doing too. Is talking to real PMs who are still working in traditional infrastructure, and I mean they're excited about this stuff. You know, they want to get involved. But man, when I connect them with an open source project, one that whether there has a grant or not, they're like without commandeering the whole mission and making themselves look undesirable, they don't know where to start. You know, because with us, you come in, you add value, you show that you're aligned and that you're going to add something to the team. With project managers, they try to structure and bring methodologies from their past experience to help the team, but it's got to be you got to have that trust level before someone jumps in. Like, okay, we're going to shake things up and we're going to do it like this. Like that for an open source team is very like whoa. So there's got to be like a kind of an easing in phase for people, and maybe like I think part-time product managers or project managers could be like a good thing too, because with Giveth, like we like to fund people to come and work on things in their spare time so that they can come and learn about it, get a reward, get interested, and gain trust with the team that they're working with. So I'd love to see that, like those kind of structures, or like bring those people into that conversation, bring the people that we're talking into the conversation now so they can help us structure it as well from both sides, our viewpoint and their viewpoint.
Yeah, like I like product management, that role within a team or that coordinator role is also a product itself, just like your team culture. It's not built up overnight. You know, it's something you actually kind of have to seed and work at and develop over time. You know, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to do this. It's almost, and even if you're trying to implement, say, agile processes like Scrum and whatnot, even for much more mature product, right? Every flavor is different for every team. Almost, it has to be, it has to be done like consciously, but yeah, like
it's like a discussion and a learning process for sure. But that can only be had between people who have a mutual respect and understanding that we're all bringing value to this. So yeah.
I think along those lines, I mean, trying to bring the lightest touch possible when you enter a project, especially projects that are like in flight, I find to be, the most effective route, because I think to your point, I think there's always a resistance to, oh no, here comes the project or product manager. What are they going to do? And then, so what I've had some success with is just trying to take a really light touch and stay out of the way as much as possible and figure out where I can start being helpful. And I mean, it's a tricky balance, but I do think one of the best ways for someone in our role to self-destruct is to come in and apply a really heavy-handed approach and, start dictating tools and processes and trying to bring things to a screeching halt. So I think that's really a tricky balance. And I think starting part-time helps because, by that nature, hopefully you're able to come in incrementally with some small steps and show that these steps are helpful and not unnecessary overhead. Because I do think, especially in this space, that's a big hurdle to overcome. Showing that a role like this is actually, helpful in reducing overhead and not unnecessary overhead.
Totally. I mean, to a certain extent, I would say that it's more like a traditional Scrum Master type role where, your job is to just make sure, like, so in our case, it wouldn't be a Scrum Master, but whatever product, other word, and it would be kind of to just make sure that whatever process is going on, that it is being adhered to to a certain extent, and there is wider coordination going on. So in that regard, it would be kind of more like what a Scrum Master would be, in the sense that your job isn't necessarily to tell people what to do, but just kind of make sure people are aware of the process and such are empowered to go and follow the process.
Yeah.
I actually think Scrum, I guess the Scrum Master role is actually well taken care of within the space. Maybe sure that it can be more regimented and structured in many ways, but that will benefit the team. But I actually think the main proportion, that the big gaping hole that's missing, is the product owner itself.
Absolutely.
That's
absolutely.
Like product marketing, market scoping, essentially. I mean, these are just jargon terms, but you know what I'm talking about, essentially.
Totally.
Understanding business value and finding it. This is hard, obviously, if you're building a client. Right? Depends, right? As always. But yeah.
No, absolutely. I would say that even from the Scrum perspective, a Scrum Master came last in this equation. Like you had the product owner and the development team, and then comes the Scrum Master kind of as a third, and that's kind of overlooked, I think, is how important the product owner is in all of this. And even defining something like done, for example, that has to come from somewhere, and then that direction needs to be coordinated together in terms of everyone getting to that same understanding. So I couldn't agree more.
Is everyone's teams distributed or local? Just curious.
Distributed.
Distributed.
We're mostly local, but a few of the projects we work on have distributed members of the project.
Local.
Distributed for now, but going to unite in Berlin in 2019.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I knew, I've been looking at this heavily, actually. Just mainly the team, the organization structure heavily fascinates me, and the level of transparency throughout the whole organization is just really visible, especially open decision making on Lumio. Essentially, I've been trying to figure out the kinks of how to actually improve agile teams like essentially figure out, I mean, not agile teams, but figure out how to, if there's like, figure out how to actually make more like, I guess, remote teams more efficient in many manners. And I'm just curious in like, what struggle, like what issues have you dealt with as a result of being remote? Obviously, there's a lot of resources out there, but I haven't seen a comprehensive one. If not, maybe like, have you heard of the Atlassian playbook? So
No, I haven't heard of that.
So essentially the Atlassian playbook is, or the Atlassian health monitor, essentially it's a guidebook, right? Or not a guidebook. It's a set of frameworks and activity and processes in which you can actually use to diagnose the health of your team in terms of teamwork, coordination, transparency, communications. And essentially you conduct these and you get like feedback from the rest of your team, and you can relatively gauge how well you're doing on many fronts. This is mainly for, I guess, local kind of Scrum Agile teams, essentially. I've been thinking essentially if there is one, or if there can be one that can be created for essentially remote distributed teams, if not even Web3 open source more specifically. Web3 open source.
Would you share a link if you have that?
I will do that. It's actually great. Like it's probably something everyone should take a look at. But yeah, like
specifically like surrounding Giveth, there's pros and there's cons, of course, with every style. We are very loose with the way we run things. I mean, all meetings are optional. All of our roles are constantly in flux. There is no set roles. So it's like it's like everything anarchy. You guys have developer anarchy. We just do everything anarchy. And it's been a great learning lesson for a lot of us to see like who functions well in that environment and who's like floundering, because we do have a turnover rate for sure for people that come in. I see a lot of good things that come out of that. Like if I was to do an extensive kind of overview of our system or lack thereof system, there would be a lot of things that I think are really cool and that allow people of certain characteristics to step up and take own things. I myself as an example of that, like when I entered Giveth, I had very little blockchain knowledge. I had very little desire to like change Web3 or be a part of it, but I found a lot of opportunities to provide value, and that finding fulfillment in my own contributions to Giveth in general got me more connected to the Web3 community, inspired me to learn a little bit more about what's happening, and allowed me to actually go after pursuing some of the helpful positions like project management, communications, this kind of stuff. And so like you end up wearing a lot of hats, which is for me super valuable because it means I can actually bounce around between different things and be really helpful. But at the same time, sometimes you can spread yourself too thin, and then hey, you have to step back and say, am I really like adding value, like coordinating the team now, or am I just like trying to touch too many points at once, and I need to like refocus back in, do a little bit more like empowerment or delegation to people and say, hey, this is yours. Like, so that light touch, like Chris is saying, that's what I tend to do with all of the teams that I work with and coordinate with. And for me, just to clarify, I just support projects. That's all I do is like support open source projects. I don't see myself as particular. I'm not a developer, so I'm not particularly building anything, but like anywhere I can add value, if I can write, if I can bring teams together, if I can find funding, like those are the things I do and I go after, and I've been pretty successful at it. And so it's like, as a people person, can I find the people who are doing cool things and who have the resources that they need to connect to keep projects moving forward? And we've been putting together a proposal for the Funders League, the Ethereum Foundation, to see if we can do that on a full-time basis. It's still kind of up in the air, so we'll see what that looks like. But I think this is a big part of that. And I think that getting teams to think about where the hurdles could be, because I mean, you have time zones, you have travel, you have language barriers. I mean, I work with 15 different nationalities. And like one of the teams that I work with specifically, they are all native speakers, native Spanish speakers except me. And so it's like thinking about cultural differences, this kind of stuff. Like there's a lot of stuff for us to stumble over. So having a unified like strategy or something that we can all like look at and say like, this is the direction we're going, is going to be like a great building block, a great foundational piece.
Yeah, that opens up, I think, something we just completely ignored, the nature of open source itself. It's just very, you have a lot of backgrounds, a lot of diversity itself naturally, and a lot of things to take in mind, especially more so than traditional team. Like one thing you touched upon is that in the beginning, you didn't know too much about the Web3 open source. I mean, like kind of movement is, well, I guess ideology. You just found yourself. Is that kind of right? Like, I'm just curious.
Yeah. I found myself like being interested. I started to just like, I got an account on Bittrex, and I was like, oh, I'll find out this cryptocurrency thing, right? So I'm like super noob in this world. But when I realized that that's boring and I have no idea how to trade cryptocurrencies, I thought about how I can add value in other ways. And then once I started to like meet the people, go to some conferences, I went to some local stuff, and then now I've been to the whole circuit, and I started to read about what projects are doing. That was what inspired me to go nomadic and start traveling full time and just see like what the opportunities were that came up along the way. If that's kind of what you're asking.
Right. I thought you actually meant that you started your position at like kind of like at GiveIt, or like, just like kind of helping teams right off the get-go without understanding Web3. I had no idea about Web3 stuff before I started working with teams. Okay.
I really just like started to, so we have this social coding thing in GiveIt, and it's developer playground where people can come and share resources and communicate with each other. They can even maybe find funding sometimes. And they were looking for someone to just like be present in the room, right? To keep the conversation going, to connect the right people. And that was where I actually started, was helping to just plug people together and keep the meetings moving, not meetings, but like, hey, if we feel like we'll have a meeting twice a month, we'll just see what everyone's up to. Like, at the max, we had like 10 different projects that were just all working on different things from different realms. A few of those have become full-fledged projects with support from the Ethereum Foundation, with the support from Aragon. And just keeping that conversation going, just giving people like a place to come back to, kind of kept them moving, and was enough social element for them to feel like, oh, cool, like what we're doing is important. We don't want people feeling siloed, like they're working in a vacuum, and that there's no resources, no funds for them to continue doing that.
One thing I've been like something that's just on my mind throughout like the while talking to various PMs, is just like how effective can someone be, especially if they're not aligned with the Web3 principles or ideology. Like you can be told it, but like, is there a threshold? Does that matter? Does understanding Web3 and the movement matter? If so, to what extent, and if it does, like hypothetically, how can you improve it? I mean, like, I know like for like, consensus has a big problem with this. May or may not have one. Status, I know that they're also running into some issues that they've been sprinting ahead with hiring, just like, I guess culture has been diluted to some extent. And I guess, it's to founders and management, I guess, kind of like, over kind of the PMs, it is like something to be aware of, in my opinion. I'm just trying to find understand anyone notice anything or have any thoughts around this.
I think there's two branches of what we're talking about. One is like project management as it applies to how to integrate certain processes within a project, and also how to integrate different projects working together. So I think if we and also obviously they link together as well in certain cases. And with as far as what you are talking about, I think on the intra-project coordination, I think that culture really matters, because that is kind of the ideology that the community aspect and the shared values aspect is really something that's a necessary ingredient of building parts of something that is bigger than individual projects and so on. So I think that's where that's relevant to explore new processes for intra-project coordination.
Absolutely. And I think we really need to look at those, excuse me, at the examples that are out there right now to kind of build on top of. And I think that, the classic example is the core devs call, and then the ETH 2.0 call, the plasma implementers. These, I think, even what we're doing right now, there's no necessary traditional incentive for us having this call and coordinating our efforts right now. This is because, we're looking to just create some kind of process that not only helps us, but helps the community. And I think that, this in and of itself is a new paradigm completely in just software, but also in human coordination. Traditionally we would be competitors and looking to keep everything that we know to ourselves. So I think that just completely breaking that that mentality or that perspective out of the equation is really what we're doing here.
Yeah, coming from like distributed governance, me and Daniel, we were like, that's kind of the area within which we've been operating for the last year. And we had a kind of an interesting synergy with coming from like distributed governance from the tech sides per se. We had an interesting synergy with soft governance and like self-managing communities, intentional communities, and so on. So I think there's like lots of different places to look at for inspiration, and their processes are very interesting. This like weird cult of facilitation is it has very interesting kind of outputs that we can learn from, and they kind of refer to what we've been talking about in this call about kind of understanding the project's pain points, each team member communicating what they're satisfied with, what they're not satisfied with. And this can also be applied on a larger scale where intra-project sentiment can be kind of facilitated this way. And actually, we had this, I don't know if this is relevant, but we had this crazy idea of running a DAO hackathon, but we would actually facilitate the hackathon, so like kind of there would be facilitators that would kind of going towards certain objectives would actually facilitate developers into kind of coordinating better and reaching their targets better. So we still have that on the agenda, and we'll keep you posted if something comes up on that.
That's awesome.
I think that's actually a really interesting area where people like us can be helpful in ways that make an impact at hackathons, because I think on one hand, the idea of self-organizing is a great idea. But I think especially when there's a hackathon and people really want to see some output from their effort in such a short period of time, I think, having a group of floating PMs who can help, a project get structured quickly and then check in from time to time would help the development teams really see the results of their work, and not end up at the end of the hackathon with either nothing to show or something maybe, half done that doesn't get touched again for another 6 months. So yeah, I think that would be a nice way for us to get engaged with the community, helping out at hackathons like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like a POC for all these efforts, like having that compressed in a certain period of time, still bringing together sort of like an anti-disciplinary group of people or an approach. And even a hackathon in terms of development is a POC for like Web3 development, but also putting project management inside the equation, I think is very interesting.
Assuming they want us. I almost feel like you got to squeeze into the conversation and just start asking why a couple of times, and they realize, hey, you're helping. Yeah, but it's a good idea. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think to harken back on what Chris was saying earlier, that's going to become as we move further along, those issues are going to become more relevant and more painful.
And I think to your point, I mean, I think that's a larger question maybe we talk about next time, how the work we do is seen, something I said earlier, how the work we do is seen as valuable work and reducing overhead and not unnecessary overhead. But I do find among a group of people for example, at the ENS hackathon over the summer, there were, not everybody, but there was a small enough group of people that wanted some type of PM help and guidance. So I think I think that group exists among all these groups. It's a matter of finding them. And sometimes it takes, 5 no's to get to 1 yes. And then that's the proof of concept, so I do think that group is out there. It's a matter of finding them. And we have to put ourselves out there to find them.
I have an unlimited amount of teams and projects that would love to talk to you guys, I'm sure. So the people is not a problem, but maybe figuring out how we provide a sustainable model moving forward is like part of that discussion as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I've kind of got a hold of Afri for next week. So one thing I'm doing right now is just like kind of doing just some user interviews on various PMs and how various teams coordinate. And essentially, I'm just talking to a couple people at the moment to then help use that insight to build a survey, which I want to hopefully blast out to more teams to figure out how to distributed open source teams operate, and there's more kinks involved, I guess. And I'm going to be talking. I will be talking to Ario next Monday. I got a hold of Jared, and he even said like he thinks PMs are useless, which is questionable. But I'm not useless. But he said they were. I don't want to quote this, something like that, right? But I can see where he's coming from our discussions, and I would actually love to actually have chats with you guys. Especially with Chris. I think we've been working with Aragon. Jared pointed me to your direction, actually, to have a chat about the experiences of Aragon, especially, and also the work with DAOs, essentially. Curious to see if you've actually tried to implement DAO structures to existing teams and such. But yeah, I've reached out to Griff, he as well, but maybe I could chat just you, Yayla, and of course everyone else.
Yeah, we can definitely bring him in to throw in some thoughts and feedback. The guy's like running at 1,000,000 miles an hour with his kilt up over his head.
Yeah, but one thing I am trying to like figure out and somehow collect together is like a playbook on how to run open source Web3 teams. Just like small modular components of like, if you want to increase this, what are some things you can do? Potentially. I sent everyone the.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, but you sparked something there. Yeah, I think. I was thinking about maybe we could do something where we have an open call for teams out there that might be having problems. That we could do, a handful of us could just show up for an hour, and if other people show up, they can ask us questions. We can try and be helpful. But at the same time, your playbook, I think, is a good idea too. And maybe it would start with, problems that we see teams having commonly. So in addition to how can you improve, is your team stuck? Do you sense that, XYZ is happening, but you should be moving faster? And then we could list out, some common causes and maybe some common actions that could address those causes. So I think a playbook like that would resonate with the teams building, which would come from their pain points, would be pretty well received.
Yeah, another point me and Aiden had in our last call was just that we realized a lot of developer teams almost almost elect the most competent kind of developer as a PM, and they begin from scratch from there. And we realized that it's almost you have to be to people who aren't essentially PMs, right? It's almost like you have to be extremely explicit, if not teach product management. And I know the best product managers I've worked along with, like godlike product PMs, are just like amazing, right? They often, I find this doing myself, it's just within a team, to kind of get aligned, you almost have to teach product management to the rest of your team, teach them why you're doing certain things and like why you're acting this way, and then potentially a guidebook could be really helpful. It's just maybe more potentially apparent to PMs. And this could be something I think I really want to explore and further develop. But yeah, like
Yeah, I just shared this. I just shared a good example of the ETH Global playbook they use for running hackathons that Ethan and the guys put together. I think something like that would be super effective. Great resource.
Yeah. And there's like stuff similar to this out there on PM shit, but like it's in a vastly, it's all developed in a vastly different context. And I think that like the small 5% that it affects it matters a lot, you know, just like having a book or if not a guide to like that takes into consideration on the various like nuances of the space, you know. As opposed to like, oh, what happens if I'm like building a highly technical product, you know, like with like being lean and such, you know. Yeah, but yeah, thanks for sharing that. Is there anything else anyone would like to talk to? Otherwise, we might just
yeah, I think having like wide collaboration on building such a document would also have a very positive impact on kind of how it's received from the ecosystem at large, because all the contributing teams kind of like gives a certain legitimacy to this kind of like technical arrogance that might hinder how it's received, let's say.
Interesting.
Yeah, and to that point actually relates to my question. I didn't think of it until you said it, but yeah, I think maybe putting out a call somehow, I mean, practicing what we preach by talking to our user base, and our user base would be the teams that we want to help essentially. You know, if there's some way we can collect problems that teams are commonly experiencing and collect them in their own words, in addition to those that we've seen ourselves, I think would also go a long way toward people really believing we're here to help them, or to try and help them.
Also, I mean, I'm not from a product management background or anything, but I think one of the biggest challenges in that mode of operation is that I think the difficult aspect of product management is like self-diagnostics of the problem. So like you don't even know what is missing. So like that's why like you need some sort of like you need to go in and analyze yourself to kind of pinpoint those pain points, basically.
Yeah,
so
like self-diagnosis.
Yeah, fair point. And it could be something simple as, do you feel like you should be farther along than you are? You know, is your backlog growing further than your progress? So maybe it's a set of questions, a set of questions to help people.
Yeah, maybe some sort of a, like educated survey could really like bring out the problems that might be hidden.
I think it could even be really helpful for like new PMs as well. It's like, what the fuck is this like open source shit? It's like, why is it important? You know, that could also be helpful. You know, just to like, you know, help them come to grips of navigating the space, what to be considerate of as well. Maybe that could be a part of it, maybe not. But that's just like a potential thing as well.
I mean, do's and don'ts are always good, and then you can decide whether you follow them or not, right?
Yeah, cool. I'll figure out somehow to coordinate that.
Yeah, I think that you know, I forget who said this at one of the conferences, but it was, you know, best practices are great because they're just best practices. You don't actually need to follow them. So I think that that's always best, is to go in suggesting, because at the end of the day, these things are kind of inherently effective. And so regardless of if teams decide to incorporate these best practices, doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it's there for them if they are willing to incorporate them. So I think that just creating resources and creating like something on GitHub that someone could just fork to even create like end of day or end of week, you know, notes or something like that. I mean, that could even that simple of a template could be really helpful. You know, what kind of should I be putting together for a spec of some kind? I don't know, like little things like that, just to have these forms that people could just fork and add to, I think could be really helpful.
Agreed. Cool. If there's nothing else, let's close it off. It's been a pleasure, and I'll figure out a way. I'll upload this video onto YouTube. By the way, it was recorded. Sorry if I did not give you guys warning, essentially. So do let me know if you want me to black out your face or your username, or like distort your voice, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll upload it onto Magician's Thread, and I'll add some notes there as well.
Awesome. And please, if everyone could check out the summary of the ring and see the principles that we've tried to put together. So it's something very akin to the principles of from the Agile, from the Manifesto of Agile Software Development. So yeah, please comment on that. Tell us what you think. Add to it. Let's continue this conversation and not just wait for next call.
Yeah.
Can I ask for
a
clarification?
Telegram group? Can you send the principles? Could you send the principles link to the Telegram group?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll do it right now.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks,
Cool.
everyone.
Thanks. Later.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.